What happens when a respected actor walks onto one of late-night television's biggest stages, only to find himself facing a host who seems determined to tear him down? Tonight, we dive into the shocking confrontation between Tramell Tillman and Jimmy Kimmel that left audiences stunned and questioning everything they thought they knew about their favorite late-night host. This is a story about power, respect, and what happens when someone finally says, "Enough is enough." Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think about celebrity interviews gone wrong, because trust me, you're going to have some strong opinions after hearing what went down that night. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was electric as usual, with the familiar hum of cameras warming up and audience members settling into their seats. Backstage, Tramell Tillman was going through his usual pre-interview routine, the kind of mental preparation that comes with years of experience in the entertainment industry. Known for his thoughtful approach to his craft and his genuine, down-to-earth personality, Tillman had appeared on countless talk shows before, always bringing that perfect balance of professionalism and charm that made him a favorite among both hosts and audiences. The actor had recently wrapped filming on a project that was generating serious buzz in Hollywood circles, and his publicist had booked him on Kimmel's show as part of the promotional tour. It seemed like a perfect match. Tillman's authentic energy paired with Kimmel's supposedly quick wit and engaging interview style. Little did anyone know that this particular evening would become a masterclass in how not to conduct a celebrity interview. As Tillman made his way to the green room, he was greeted by the usual parade of production assistants and showrunners, all smiles and casual conversation. The energy felt normal, even positive. He chatted briefly with other guests scheduled for the show, exchanged pleasantries with the makeup team, and reviewed his talking points one last time. Everything seemed to be proceeding exactly as it should for what was supposed to be a straightforward promotional appearance. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel was in his dressing room, but something was different about his usual pre-show energy. Sources close to the production later revealed that Kimmel had been in an unusually confrontational mood that day, though the reasons remained unclear. Perhaps it was the pressure of maintaining ratings in an increasingly competitive late-night landscape, or maybe personal issues were bleeding into his professional life. Whatever the case, those who worked closely with him noticed a sharp edge to his demeanor that wasn't typically present. When the time came for Tillman's segment, the actor walked onto the stage with his characteristic confidence and warmth. The audience responded positively, offering enthusiastic applause as he made his way to the guest chair. He waved to the crowd, flashed that genuine smile that had endeared him to fans across multiple projects, and settled in for what he expected to be an enjoyable conversation about his work and upcoming projects. Kimmel's opening was standard fare, the kind of light banter that typically serves as a warm-up before diving into more substantial topics. But even from those first few exchanges, there was something slightly off about the host's tone. It wasn't immediately obvious to the audience, but Tillman picked up on subtle cues that suggested this interview might not follow the usual script. There was a certain coldness in Kimmel's eyes, a sharpness to his questions that felt more interrogational than conversational. The first real red flag came when Kimmel made what seemed like an innocent comment about Tillman's recent career choices, but delivered it with a tone that felt distinctly dismissive. It was the kind of comment that could be brushed off as playful ribbing between friends, but there was an underlying current of something more hostile. Tillman, ever the professional, responded with grace and humor, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer territory. But Kimmel wasn't interested in safe territory. Instead of following up on Tillman's gracious response, the host doubled down, making another comment that was even more pointed and personal. This time, there was no mistaking the intention behind the words. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something was wrong but not quite understanding what they were witnessing. Tillman's expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could see the subtle changes in his posture, the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated he was processing what was happening and deciding how to respond. This wasn't the kind of playful celebrity roasting that late-night audiences expected and enjoyed. This was something else entirely, something that felt mean-spirited and unprofessional. The conversation continued to deteriorate as Kimmel seemed determined to push boundaries that should never have been crossed. Each question became more loaded, each comment more personal and cutting. It was as if the host had abandoned any pretense of conducting a legitimate interview and had instead decided to use his platform to attack his guest for reasons that remained mysterious to everyone watching. What started as subtle jabs quickly transformed into something far more serious as Kimmel continued his relentless assault on Tillman's character and career choices. The host began questioning the actor's talent, suggesting that his success was somehow undeserved or the result of factors other than his actual abilities. These weren't the kind of challenging questions that good interviewers ask to create compelling television. These were personal attacks disguised as interview questions, delivered with a smirk that made it clear Kimmel was enjoying himself. Tillman maintained his composure with remarkable restraint, but it was becoming increasingly clear that this was unlike any interview situation he had ever encountered. When Kimmel made a particularly cutting remark about Tillman's background and upbringing, suggesting that the actor hadn't earned his place in Hollywood through merit alone, something shifted in the studio atmosphere. The audience, which had been uncomfortably silent for several minutes, began to murmur among themselves, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. The breaking point came when Kimmel crossed a line that no professional interviewer should ever cross. He brought up personal details about Tillman's family life, information that had nothing to do with his professional work and everything to do with Kimmel's apparent desire to humiliate his guest on national television. The comment was so inappropriate, so clearly designed to wound rather than entertain, that even the production crew began exchanging worried glances behind the cameras. Tillman's response was measured but firm. He looked directly at Kimmel and said, in a voice that carried both dignity and warning, that he hadn't come on the show to be personally attacked, and that if Kimmel wanted to conduct a professional interview about his work, he was happy to continue, but he wouldn't sit there and be disrespected on national television. The audience actually began to applaud, clearly supporting Tillman's stance and expressing their disapproval of their host's behavior. But instead of backing down or apologizing, Kimmel seemed to interpret Tillman's reasonable response as a challenge. He leaned back in his chair with that trademark smirk and made another comment, this one even more inflammatory than the last. He questioned Tillman's right to set boundaries during the interview, suggesting that as a guest on his show, the actor should be grateful for any attention, positive or negative, that he was receiving. This was the moment when Tillman's professional facade finally cracked, not because he lost his temper, but because he made a conscious decision to stop enabling Kimmel's behavior. He sat forward in his chair, looked directly into the camera rather than at his host, and addressed the audience directly. He thanked them for their support, acknowledged that this wasn't the kind of interview experience he had expected, and made it clear that he respected both himself and the audience too much to continue participating in what had become a public humiliation exercise. Kimmel, perhaps realizing that he was losing control of the situation, attempted to regain his authority by interrupting Tillman and making yet another disparaging comment. But this time, his guest was ready for him. Tillman turned back to face the host and delivered a response that was both devastating and completely professional. He pointed out that Kimmel's behavior was reflecting poorly not just on himself, but on his show, his network, and everyone associated with the production. The actor's words were chosen carefully, but their impact was unmistakable. He talked about the responsibility that comes with having a platform, about the difference between humor and cruelty, and about the importance of treating guests with basic human dignity. It was a masterclass in how to stand up for oneself without descending to the level of one's attacker. And the audience responded with sustained applause that clearly indicated whose side they were on. Kimmel's reaction to this calm but firm pushback revealed just how far he had strayed from any semblance of professional behavior. Instead of acknowledging that he had crossed lines or attempting to salvage what remained of the interview, he became even more aggressive. He accused Tillman of being unable to take a joke, of being too sensitive for the entertainment industry, and of trying to control the direction of an interview on his show. The irony of Kimmel's accusations wasn't lost on anyone in the studio. Here was a host who had spent the better part of 20 minutes attacking his guest personally and professionally, now claiming that his victim was the problem for refusing to quietly accept the abuse. The audience's reaction made it clear that they weren't buying Kimmel's narrative, and their continued support for Tillman was becoming more vocal and obvious with each passing moment. As the tension in the studio reached its peak, production assistants began signaling frantically from behind the cameras, clearly hoping to find a way to salvage the situation, or at least get to a commercial break where they could regroup. But Kimmel seemed oblivious to the chaos he had created, doubling down on his attacks and making it clear that he had no intention of backing down or acknowledging that his behavior was inappropriate. Tillman, meanwhile, had reached his limit. With the same grace and dignity he had maintained throughout the ordeal, he stood up from his chair, removed his microphone, and prepared to leave the stage. But before he could make his exit, Kimmel made one final comment that would seal his fate and ensure that this interview would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The comment that Jimmy Kimmel made as Tramell Tillman prepared to leave the stage was so egregious, so completely beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior, that it shocked even those who had been watching the situation deteriorate for the past 30 minutes. Without going into the specific details, which were too personal and inappropriate to repeat, Kimmel's final attack was aimed at something deeply personal to Tillman, something that had absolutely nothing to do with his professional work or public persona. The reaction in the studio was immediate and unmistakable. The audience, which had been growing increasingly uncomfortable throughout the interview, erupted in a chorus of boos and angry voices. Several people actually stood up and began heading for the exits, clearly disgusted by what they had witnessed. The production crew, who had been trying to find ways to salvage the situation, realized that there was no coming back from what had just happened. Tillman stopped dead in his tracks, turned back to face Kimmel, and delivered a response that will be remembered as one of the most powerful moments in late-night television history. Speaking directly to the host, he said that he had come on the show to promote his work and engage with fans, but that he refused to be anyone's victim or entertainment at the expense of his dignity and self-respect. He pointed out that Kimmel's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was cruel, and that someone in his position should understand the responsibility that comes with having such a large platform. But Tillman wasn't finished. In a voice that carried the weight of years of experience in an industry that often treats its participants as disposable commodities, he addressed the broader issue of how guests are treated on talk shows, how power dynamics can be abused, and how audiences deserve better than to watch someone be systematically torn down for entertainment. It was a speech that transcended the immediate situation and spoke to larger issues about respect, dignity, and the responsibility of those who hold positions of influence. The impact of Tillman's words was immediate and profound. The remaining audience members burst into sustained applause, many of them standing to show their support. Even some of the production crew could be seen nodding in agreement, clearly moved by the actor's eloquent and heartfelt response to the situation he had been put in. Kimmel, faced with the undeniable evidence of how his behavior was being received, made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. He tried to frame the entire situation as a misunderstanding, suggesting that Tillman had misinterpreted his intentions and that everything had been meant in good fun. But his words fell flat in the face of what everyone had witnessed, and his attempt to gaslight both his guest and his audience only served to make his behavior seem even more egregious. At this point, the show's producers made the decision that should have been made much earlier in the evening. They signaled for security to escort Tillman safely from the studio, not because he had done anything wrong, but because it was clear that Kimmel was not going to allow the situation to de-escalate naturally. The decision to remove Tillman rather than address Kimmel's behavior sent a clear message about where the show's priorities lay, and it wasn't with treating their guests with respect and dignity. As Tillman was escorted from the stage, he maintained the same composure and dignity that he had shown throughout the entire ordeal. He thanked the audience for their support, acknowledged the production crew who had been caught in an impossible situation, and made it clear that he held no ill will toward anyone except the person who had created the toxic environment in the first place. The aftermath in the studio was chaotic and uncomfortable. Many audience members continued to leave, expressing their disgust and disappointment as they filed out. Those who remained seemed stunned by what they had witnessed, and the energy in the room was completely different from the usual celebratory atmosphere that typically follows a successful talk show taping. Kimmel attempted to continue with the show as if nothing had happened, but it was clear that the evening had been irreparably damaged. His remaining interactions with other guests felt forced and awkward, and even his usual comedic timing seemed off. The incident had clearly affected everyone involved, from the crew to the audience to the other guests who had witnessed the unprecedented breakdown of professional standards. The final moments of Tillman's appearance on the show, from his dignified response to Kimmel's attacks to his graceful exit from the stage, demonstrated exactly why he had built such a respected reputation in the entertainment industry. While his host had shown himself capable of petty cruelty and professional misconduct, Tillman had proven that it was possible to stand up for oneself without compromising one's integrity or stooping to the level of one's attacker. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. On one side was a host who had used his position of power to attack and humiliate a guest, someone who had abused his platform and betrayed the trust of his audience. On the other side was an actor who had maintained his dignity in the face of unprecedented provocation, who had spoken truth to power, and who had shown that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to participate in it. What do you think about celebrities who stand up for themselves when they're being mistreated? Drop a comment below and let me know if you think Tillman handled this situation the right way. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the moments when Hollywood's biggest personalities show us who they really are.